Hello, everyone. It is Sunday at 1:02. It is very windy here, starting to rain. If you see anything like blowing away, that's what it is. So thank you so much for joining. As I mentioned, we will be starting to pick up the broadcast schedule a little bit more. Thank you all for tuning in. Those of you tuning in after the fact, thank you as well. I am joined today by Komal Ashfaq. I just figured out how to say her first name right, so I probably have some work to do on her last name. She is an RIT senior thesis student. I think I'm saying that right. In any case, I had done some work on a film for her a couple weeks ago and wanted to have her on. So we will bring her on.
Hello.
Komal, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, thanks. So yeah, we talked a little bit off air. So for those people who may not be familiar with movie making and such, so we filmed a couple of weeks ago, and now, probably most people think, well, you filmed, so a week or so, let's see this damn movie. But that's not exactly how it works, right?
No, there's a lot of work that comes right after you're done shooting. The editing process itself can take up to a month. The sound design process is its own separate beast. The special effects that are required for this film, I'll first of all have to seek someone out to do it, and then it'll take a lot of revisions to get it exactly the right way to match the lighting and everything. The pipeline is pretty complicated, requires a lot of coordination, requires teamwork from a lot of people, not just in the shoot, but also after the fact. And of course, there's music and color grading. Just all of it together will definitely give you easily another like 2-3 months that you're looking at. And that's for student films. I'm not sure how professional films ever get made ever, because it's so much more work.
I want you to introduce yourself in a minute, but I talk a lot. But it's funny you mentioned, this is kind of on a smaller scale. A friend of mine that I've done some work for, he was working in special effects in Hollywood. And I don't know, I haven't seen this film, but I guess there's a Will Smith film where there's like a bunch of things chasing him. So they had my friend who was working on the film, they had all these things. They wanted these things chasing Will Smith to be like white, like head to toe white. So they spent countless hours and money to do this special effect. And then they filmed it and they sat there all excited. All right, let's check it out. Fuck. We just spent all this time and money to have a bunch of people in head to toe white chasing a black guy. This isn't going to work. Scrap it. And I know part of that comes from a lot of people don't want to stand up to a director and be like, hey, let's just think this over. But another part of it is you picture something and you fall in love with it, and you see what you picture, but not exactly what it is. And then you look at it and say, what the fuck was I thinking? Have you ever had a moment like that where in your head everything works out perfectly, and then you put it down in film or whatever, and you say, oh my God?
Yeah, that happens a lot. The term is killing your baby that we use at RIT, which is that you take a great idea that you love, it comes out malformed, misshapen, and it will be better off dead, to continue the metaphor.
Sure, yeah. Let's
You
take it
have
all the
to
way to the dump.
substantially. Yeah, it's rough, but also it's a good idea to acclimate yourself to sensitivities in terms of people other than yourself. So you do have to consider often what your audience is going to think and feel, what the culture is like at the time, what the what's happening in terms of currency. You can't be so self-involved that you lose track of what your ideas will look like once they're outside of your head. And that's because it's very, first of all, it's very self-centered and selfish and short-sighted to do that, because you're not the center of the world. And it's also not meaningful enough to other people if you focus only on what you're thinking and feeling. So when you're contemplating an idea, even if you think it's the greatest, best thing ever, you have to take input. You have to have some revisions. You have to come back like a few months later and look at it and really consider what you're trying to say and to who. Because art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's always interacting with people around you. It's always saying something to them other than what you yourself are thinking. And in that way, it's more powerful, because it can reach more people, possibly. So killing your baby is a very necessary part of allowing your audience to have some input and of thinking in a broader, more accepting way of things outside of yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting way to put it, because it's also, to use your metaphor here, it's like you want to dress your baby up and, make him or her look their best. And, as a parent or a filmmaker or whatever, you'd also love to follow your child around and say, watch out for that. And let me introduce you. But at some point, all right, I'm killing this dead baby. But, at some point, either as a parent or a filmmaker, you're done with it. You have to say, my work here is done. Let's put it out and see how the film does. Let's see what people think about it. Because at some point when you're not there to explain, oh, what I was going for was, or this is what I meant, it really stands on its own. And is that difficult? To be like, all right, I'm done with editing. I've put all of my fingerprints on this, that I'm going to, let's let her fly.
I mean, it is initially difficult, yeah, because it ties back to the concept in art history and art philosophy about how art doesn't belong to the artist after it's out there. It belongs to everyone after that, because everybody has a reading of it. So in that sense, if you accept that, then you can manage to let go. But it's obviously hard when, for example, your work is widely misinterpreted. And it becomes a little bit challenging to let it go out there and have people absolutely miss the point, or absolutely disregard what you're trying to say, or just not like it. Sometimes it doesn't work. So if you make garbage and it doesn't work, it's easy to let it go, because eventually you recognize it's garbage. But if it's something you really put a lot of thought into, if it's something you personally feel is good, and people still aren't interacting with it the way you want them to, that is, I would say, the hardest sort. So for me, I'm from a relatively conservative country, Pakistan, where
Yeah, Komal, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you could please introduce yourself, let everybody know a little bit about your background and things. We jumped the gun a little there, but yes,
right.
Please go right ahead.
So I'm an international student from Pakistan. I'm studying grad I'm in grad school at RIT in my third year doing film. I have a background in production management, which basically means that I was sort of like a team lead, basically, to a group of filmmakers in a corporate setting. So my undergraduate was in business and my grad degree is in film, and my career has been in combining the two, and that's where I hope to continue after I graduate, just sort of move into production management or similar management roles in creative fields. And other than that, I am a writer, illustrator, and a filmmaker, and I have worked in all those fields in a both professional and hobbyist capacity. I have an Instagram where I'm currently writing a webcomic about urban legends from back home. And I write a lot of essays on social media for work that for topics that I consider important to my country, such as feminism in South Asia and critique of religious thought and religious extremism, and kind of a more liberal set of ideas for contemporary Pakistan. And that's pretty much it.
Sure, that's quite a bit, really. So you're from Pakistan, and how long have you been in the country?
Oh, in the US, I've only been here 2 years. I think 2.5 now. This is my third year.
Right.
And the rest of my life I was in Pakistan, and I honestly thought I would never leave or never be able to leave.
Right. So did you learn English in Pakistan?
So Pakistan is like a former British colony, meaning a lot of leftovers from the British Empire are still there, such as teaching English in schools. English as one of the official languages. Well, I guess not one of the official languages. Our official language is Urdu, but English is used widely in documentation and schooling and business. Yeah. So English, pretty much everybody who goes to school learns it from
Right.
preschool on.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So what would you say is something that most Americans, or even Americans who consider themselves, worldly or think they know something about something, what would you say is something that most Americans just do not know about Pakistan?
Well, I don't really have a gauge on what most Americans think of Pakistan, but I feel the better things about Pakistan are generally not known, right? Like there's a narrative out there about terrorism and Islamic extremism. And obviously, there's a move for people to not be racist and to be politically correct. So they're very accepting of you as a person. But that still means that they lack information about what the good things about Pakistan are. So, for example, the beauty of the northern mountains, where a lot of push for tourism is happening currently. Probably one of the most beautiful places on earth, easily. The geography is very varied. A lot of people seem to think Pakistan is a desert for some reason, or in the Middle East, but it's a South Asian country. There's areas that are rich with forest and river. There's mountains. My city is coastal, so I'm on the beach, and there is definitely a desert as well. So it's geographically varied. It's very heterogeneous in terms of people's beliefs and values and cultures. Not religiously, perhaps, but culturally. And the food is really great. And it's a little different from Indian food because it's very meat-based, whereas India is often focused on vegetarian dishes.
Right.
So those are things that I feel the common American doesn't really have an idea of.
Yeah, I mean, in addition, I'm sure that 95% of Americans couldn't find Pakistan on a map. And that's not because of the lack of maps, but just because they don't know where it is. But I think you made a great point in terms of, whether it's institutionalized racism or whatever, where people can be like, oh, I'm cool with Komal. She's awesome. Pakistanis, though, whoa, that's kind of wild, wild west out there. I don't know about Pakistan, but Komal is perfectly cool with me. And that just seems to be pervasive, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about. The people that are questioning police tactics and brutality and things will still say, no, that cop that's at the door at Wegmans, he is super cool. I love that guy. That guy's my guy, but I'm not real cool with cops. So there's that granular level of person to person. But then when you look at a larger picture, that's where it seems like the stereotypes come in. Have you encountered any, stereotypes or, anything like that?
I get asked a lot of weird questions that I feel stem from stereotypes. But I don't think anyone has explicit. Well, I had an Uber driver who asked me if I ever had a pet rodent, and I thought that was such a strange question. And I was like,
Ever
why
had a what?
pet rodent? That's so specific. And he was like, aren't there a lot of rodents in Pakistan? And I was like, not especially. Why would there be? And he was like, isn't Pakistan a desert full of rodents? And I was like, no.
So he asked you if you had a pet rodent?
Yeah, because he was like, Pakistan, desert has rodents. She probably had a pet rodent since there's so many rodents in the desert. So that's the question he asked me, which I thought was...
That's quite a leap to take.
It is, but it was funny. And then I think other questions that are stereotypical, I have been asked about exactly how much terrorism there is. Honestly, I don't know if that's a stereotypical question, because for, I think, a period of 10 years while I was growing up, 10 to 15, there was a patch of terrorism that hopefully recently has subsided. So I would say that is a stereotypical question, but also rooted in some degree of truth. It's just that when you have these narratives that are absolutely divorced from the understanding of normalcy of a country, then it leads to stereotypes, even if you're asking a correct question, because you only have one way of thinking of that place, even though statistically it doesn't make sense, right? Like my city alone with like 17 million or more, I'm not sure how many people, not every single one of them will have had an encounter with terrorism. Not every single one of them is going to be like me. Just like here, even in your own neighborhood, there's going to be people completely different from you. So mathematically speaking, it makes no sense that everybody in a country is in a desert or in like contact or proximity to terrorism, or doesn't have a normal urban life, or even in agrarian communities, because Pakistan has a big urban-rural split. You've got kids just being normal kids, even if they, for example, don't always get to go to school. They're still like making TikToks of each other doing cartwheels, like kids do.
Sure. Yeah, and I know you and I have discussed, because to let people behind the curtain, acting and filmmaking is a lot of sitting around as well. So I know you and I have talked about, maybe your upbringing in Pakistan, that things that didn't seem abnormal to you. Like you had mentioned to me that your house had been robbed, like with you in it.
Yep.
Like, And, that's something that, I feel like in America, that's if that happens, it's abnormal, it's unusual, it's news, for lack of a better word. But that sort of thing, while, it's probably not commonplace in Pakistan, it happens. Like, I don't know if I didn't even ask a question. I did notice
No,
that.
I get what you're saying. What you're talking about essentially is what level of suffering do you consider an acceptable benchmark? And that varies from person to person and generation to generation. For example, Gen Z kids, like kids who are like teens right now, um, for example, when I'm working as a teaching assistant, a lot of kids will talk about mental health reasons for not completing homework. They'll be like, I was really stressed and anxious about school, and there were too many assignments, and so I couldn't do it, and like I had a panic attack. And that's acceptable, right? We're learning to be more sensitive to that level of suffering. We're like, okay, that's normal, that's acceptable, mental health is important, so you'll be excused, or let us know earlier so that we could get you an extension or something like that. Understanding and empathy, the benchmark for that has risen. Whereas if you look at the baby boomer generation, like if their parents hit them, if they didn't like do their homework, that was normal for them. They were like, yeah, my dad hit me, but he loves me. He's just giving me a bit of tough love. And now that would be impossible. You could not see that as normal to hit your kid.
Sure.
So it's very similar to that. When you're brought up as a child, you don't know what's normal. You are being raised to see what is normal and what's not. And for me, a lot of acts of violence, I think I've experienced a lot of them. And I don't know if that's normal for other people in my city or not. Probably is, because it is a violent city with a high crime rate. But I didn't think it was unusual, and I didn't think that it was something I needed help for. I didn't think that it had an impact on my mental health. I just am retrospectively assessing it as such after being in an era where there is such an increased sensitivity to what counts as suffering. So the benchmark for suffering should always be as high as possible so that the least number of people go through bad things. And that justification that, oh, my dad loves me, but he's still hitting me, and that's okay, it's tough love. Or for me, that, oh, I got robbed at knife point, it's not a big deal, like other people have it worse. That sort of justification sort of excuses the violence itself and puts the onus of blame and recovery and like strength on the person who's suffering. And I don't think that's a very good way to live. It becomes an uncomfortable sort of existence for you to fight yourself for the right to feel bad about something bad that happened to you. So some of my experiences are like that I'm processing retrospectively, including I think 4 robberies and just a lot of wild incidents.
Yeah. And, now with some distance and living here for 2.5 years, like, do you live on campus, off campus?
I am currently living in Boston, so I'm off campus. And then I'll be back in Rochester next semester, but I've been living off campus the whole time.
Cool. So like if you came home, whether it's Boston, Rochester, or whatever, and someone's there with a knife or a gun, would you react differently now than maybe you had, when it happened before? And would that be because you're not in Pakistan, or would it be because you're older and you have more, you have a bigger picture to look at it?
No, I'm too strong now. I didn't want to become this strong. I'm this strong because of things that happened to me that weren't great. But I don't think much phases me anymore. I can function at very high levels, no matter how difficult things are. Which is not advocation for,
Sure.
But
if someone,
I don't know if I'd be afraid. I'd probably try to think how I could get out of it, or if I could bend the knife in some way. Or
right, you might be like, look, fucker, you better have a gun in your back pocket, because
I would put up a fight. Yeah, I don't think I'd be like mentally scarred by it now. There's already too many things I'm mentally scarred by. So, one more, what's it gonna do? What am I gonna do? Die?
Right. Oh my God. I saw it's not funny. I almost said, I say the word funny when I can't think of the right word right away. And oftentimes funny is certainly not the right word. But it was like,
I like the word absurd.
Absurd would be applicable. It was on the Instagram and something, a la, when you think I'm done, then come get me, or something. But it was dressed up quite a bit, but so if or when you go back to Pakistan, do you think that your time here, like the changes that you've made, either being in this country and culture, and the distance from the Pakistani culture, do you think that would make it difficult for you to re-assimilate, or to just go back? Would it be, and I'm making a huge assumption here, but I'm guessing that as a woman in Pakistan, the way that you carry yourself, or that you've learned to carry yourself, wouldn't really jive. Am I way off base there?
Well, so first of all, no, I don't think it would be different for me to go back, but that's because I always hated it. So I'm not going to hate it anymore. I have very Western ideas of feminism. And I have always had them from the get-go, because Western feminism is actually just common sense that women are people. And
right,
normal people. That's not. I wouldn't even.
It's not a radical thought.
It's a basic womanly idea. Like, every woman has this inherent sense of her own individuality and personhood. So in Pakistan, obviously, I had this sense all the time, and the way that I had to move through society, in a way that limited it so much, made me stressed out and frustrated and tired all the time. I've had like a lot of sexual assault, lots of like regular assault, some stalking incidents. I have had to cover up in like a long sheet every time I go out, because that's what my mom wanted me to. I didn't have spaces to walk in public. If I would walk just like 10 minutes to a store, every man would be staring at me. Shamelessly. The staring is such a weird thing over there. I can't get used to how nobody looks at you here.
Even though you're basically covered.
It doesn't matter if you're covered. They just want to look at women, because it's a relatively sexually repressed society. And the degree of it varies. Like, if you're in a more liberal area of the city, like if you're in a mall, for example, a fancy shopping mall, there's less incidents of that. But just out in public, there's very few public spaces for women to be in. You can't go to a park. You can't exercise in a park. You can't jog because someone's gonna look at your boobs bouncing. You can't. Well, recently an ad got banned for dance, so you can't like dance unless it's like a contained family function, like a wedding or something. there's lots of limits on the ways women move. You definitely can't be out late at night because it's considered automatically unsafe and potential for rape. So all of those things I could not accept as normal based on my gender, even while I was living there. So if I go back, I'm just gonna default to that same state. Because this idea of me being a special derivation of a man with special rules based around the type of genitals I have makes no sense to me, and never has and never will, and I will never accept it.
Yeah, I get that. But basically, if you were to walk the city square as is, like all commerce in your city would stop. Like just
I once
be fucking mayhem.
One time I just like wore this really pretty red shirt that was, I think, a little form-fitting, and walked down the street, and a motorcyclist crashed because he was staring at me. So that was like really funny. But
for you,
for me, he was fine. He lived, but I hope he learned his lesson.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
But I don't think commerce would stop, but definitely someone's gonna give you a dirty look, like cover up, or someone's gonna follow you. In some instances, like a couple of weirdos try to take a picture of me. It's complicated. I'm not even giving a valid enough or a complex enough or a three-dimensional enough image of what it's like, because
sure.
There is normalcy at the same time as all this is happening. And I know it sounds really weird and absurd.
It does. And thank you so much for initiating that word into the lexicon, because it is a perfect description. Because I sometimes, like the East Avenue Wegmans is a perfect example. I will walk in there sometimes and literally think to myself, where the fuck are these girls coming from dressed like this? Like, and it is what it is. But you're talking about quite literally 90% of your flesh covered, and people reacting even, greater with more absurdity at that. Like, it's just, it's absurd, I think is a great way.
I think it does tie down to the way both the East and the West, the world at large, inherently places a sexual quality on women's presence, which I don't think as a woman is inherent to you. I never saw myself as especially a sexual creature, or for how individual with dignity is ever going to frame themselves. But the way that, for example, until very recently, Western media talks about women was almost always sexual, and almost always from the male gaze. And that's the same in art history. That's the same in literature. And in the East, you just have the flip side of that, which is that female sexuality is a bad thing, and you should cover women up because they're so sexy. And the West is like, we love sexy women. Show us the sexiness. Both of them are fundamental. They're two sides of the same coin, which is inherent sexuality being placed on women's presence, even when there's nothing about them that is attempting to be that way.
Sure.
And it's a gray area now, because a lot of women have started to use that. Like they make use of the system to get ahead, like influencers, for example. Their butts are out all the time because they know that in this sort of social setting, they're gonna get ahead for it. They're gonna get attention for it. They're gonna get fame for it. And that's great. They're using the system. But the fundamental change for the sake of female dignity that has to happen here is to let women just be normal people occupying normal spaces the way men do, without thinking of them in terms of attractiveness all the time, the same way women interact with men.
Sure. I mean, I think you meant to say most men, because part of my feminism is like I get tired of getting checked out every time I walk to the car to grab a bottle of water, and like I've never seen a chick crash her motorcycle, but I assume it's been close. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And you're right, it is ingrained. It's not, certainly I can't speak for the Eastern world, but I would say it's not something learned. I don't think that, boys, children, young men, I don't think, there's anything one way or the other that says when you see a pretty girl, or when you see a girl walking down the sidewalk, don't think of this, think of this, don't notice that.
I mean, I sort of disagree there. I feel like you naturally can be and should be attracted to women. That's fine. But you can be attracted to women in a way that doesn't negate their personhood and in a way that doesn't make them uncomfortable.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. I would also think that what men know, both here and there and probably worldwide, that where that line is, I would say few men know, and even maybe fewer care. I can remember, being 15, 16, 17 years old, and driving by a girl and whistling at her or something like that. And to me, that was just like, yeah, I'm a kid. She's, a young girl, whatever. I'm not, it just seemed to be something to do, where now I can see, where I'll see like a construction crew that stops what they're doing to, hey, woo, I can see that that's a little different, and that's probably a little beyond the limits of good taste.
Well, that does tie back to what we were saying about benchmarks shifting, right? So just the way benchmarks for violence and mental health and empathy shift, the same does for morality. And I guess currently in the social justice era, it's really important to consider what the other person is gonna be feeling. And with the rise of social media, a lot of women have made it heard what they feel. So like when I was younger as well, catcalling was framed as something that was flattering. So I'm assuming some women would be raised to enjoy it, and some men would be raised to think of it as a compliment. And now that's not the case, because I think the way that it coexisted with other demeaning ideas of womanhood led to female existence sort of being confined into that. So, for example, if you get catcalled maybe once, you might think, oh, I'm pretty. But if it happens, say, every time you step out the house, you start thinking, oh, everybody looks at me as a sex object, like I'm not a person. So the repetition of that is dangerous. The act in itself of whistling at a woman is not inherently bad, but it exists within a system that makes it bad and dangerous. And it's important to think of those cultural complexities.
Yeah. Now, how much of, as you refer to it, the social justice movement and the Me Too stuff, how much of that, to the best of your knowledge, has translated to the Eastern world or Pakistan or some of those more, I'll call them repressive societies? I don't know if that's the right word, but.
Well, most of the movements that happen in the West and the US, especially the US, because it owns such a large chunk of media. So everybody who's watching entertainment will typically watch American or say British entertainment because it's so widespread. So ideas that come from the US, news that comes from the US does filter down to the rest of the world. And it depends on what parts of society accept them and what don't. So liberal ideas about social justice and the community centeredness of the internet definitely allows for those ideas to come to liberal spheres within Pakistan. And there are many liberal spots that are growing. Not sure how statistically significant they are, but I interact pretty much almost every day with that circle. There's Facebook groups, there's online communities, Reddit forums, etc. for liberal thought, a lot of which is rooted in Western philosophy, and America and American media does come through and help, especially third wave feminism. I know a lot of backlash happens to third wave feminism in the West, where people are like, we don't need it. Women are milking it for all it's worth. Women are trying to use it as a way to get ahead when they have everything, they've got all their rights. But the dialogue here does translate to women across the world as well. And it helps because often those societies don't have the words for them. Often you don't know how to,
like literally.
Yeah, literally.
Don't have the word in the language for.
Yeah. There was this one girl, Senur Khoso, who I interviewed for a doc, and she is studying to be a mental health professional, and she wants to go back to Pakistan because she says the lexicon, the Pakistani language, Urdu, does not have phrases or common known words for a lot of mental health disorders or ways to frame those words and thoughts, because they're so relatively modern, and she wants to go back and bring them in so that especially low-income groups that don't go to schools and don't learn English, can benefit from those ideas. So because of the internet and because of the prevalence of US media, the ideas here can definitely filter through to other countries and cultures.
Is there, and obviously this is your opinion, is there room for liberal/Western ideals in a religious government? Because again, I'm talking out of my ass and ignorant, but is Pakistan, is that like a Sharia country, or, and I know that Sharia law gets a bad rap, but is it more of a religious governmental organization?
So Pakistan is an Islamic republic, but it's also democratic, and a lot of its constitution has basis in religious thought, but not purely so. It's a mix. That being said, it is a little difficult to inculcate liberal ideals when your constitution and laws derive from Islam to some degree. For example, censorship, right? Censorship is quite bad in the US as well, but in Pakistan, a fully clothed woman who was dancing in a biscuit ad, and there was absolutely nothing sexual about her dance at all. It got banned for being vulgar. And YouTube, I think, was banned in our country for like a year because there was one video on it that showed the face of Prophet Muhammad. But obviously, you can't control content on a public platform like YouTube.
Right.
And the decision to ban it was weird and backwards. And similar things happen, like, TikTok is being banned for being vulgar as well. Tinder was being banned for being immoral, since you're not allowed to date, technically speaking, in Islam. So it is an uphill battle. It's important to remember people are not the same as the government. Like Trump is not the average American, for example. Although there are people like him who got him elected. And it's similar in Pakistan, that even though a lot of people see this as moral degeneracy in terms of religion and law, of which there's an intersection. There are liberal pockets. There's engagement with these apps. Everybody's on YouTube. Everybody's on TikTok. Everybody is trying to find love on Tinder, for example. So people in general will be normal almost everywhere. But governments and systems of belief are going to vary. And a lot of problems also stem from those socially. Generation matters. Like, my parents are relatively more conservative than me. They would want me to directly marry, never date. So, they told me to. It's so funny. One time my mom just like panicked randomly when I was 25, and she was like, why aren't you finding a husband? Why don't you like any guy? And I was like, And she was like, how will you find someone? And I was like, you find someone. Isn't it your job to arrange my marriage? And then she was like, where do people normally find them? And I said, Tinder. And she said, download Tinder. And I was like, you want me to date someone, Mom? And she was like, no, just find a husband on Tinder. So she likes the idea of platonic friendships with men before you marry them, but she doesn't agree with the idea of romance or dating. And so there are these shades of gray in terms of the conservative, liberal, cultural, Islamic, Western ideas that will always exist in Pakistan as long as it's an Islamic republic, because law and God are forms of validation for your thought process, right? You're going to be like, yes, this idea is correct because God says so, or because the law says so. And as long as Islam is rooted in there, it's going to affect people's behavior and thought process, because it's a form of giving your thoughts the most validity, the most that you think is truthful. And you're going to obviously try to gravitate towards what you think the truth is.
Sure. It does seem to me that there's very little room for both. Just like something is going to get extremely short shrift if there's ever a country that says, yes, we are an Islamic republic, but we are not a repressive society. We have equal rights for women, and we believe that there's equal protection under the law. Am I missing something, or is that an impossibility for those two things to coexist?
No. For example, Malaysia is a Muslim country that's very liberal, where women wear anything they want, believe anything they want. Turkey had a point in time where it was such. Even Pakistan, I think in the 60s and 70s, it was very, very liberal. People could wear bikinis to the beach or something, for example. It depends on a form of cherry picking, I would say, honestly. You would have to interpret your religious text in a more progressive way and have that validated through state for that to happen. But it does happen. It's not an impossibility. And there are definitely progressive forms of Islam, some that, for example, accept the LGBTQ, some that are more egalitarian for women. They definitely exist, but they're contested, because obviously interpretation is always going to be a gray area.
Sure.
Like for poems and for art.
Yeah. So you had mentioned something, about kind of representation and maybe how, whether it's Middle Easterners or just foreigners in general are represented, and that becomes the truth. If me, although I hope I'm not Joe Hot Dog Cola USA American, most Americans, when their exposure to different people and different cultures is what they see on TV or what they read in the media, rather than a face-to-face interaction, that representation is left oftentimes to someone who isn't telling the right story. How do you feel about the representation of, the Eastern culture? I'll just call it that, but, Middle Easterners or, Pakistanis, anything like that?
Well, that's a very complicated question, honestly.
Yeah.
Initially, before I got into film, I was pretty angry about representation all the time because I was like, they're just not doing it right. But now that I am working in film, I sort of see that the people in it are not always the right people. The best person for the job is not always doing the job. The best filmmaker is often not the best social justice warrior. The best artist might not be the best culturally competent. And that's okay. Everybody can't know everything all the time. It has to be a group effort. I would say at this point that people who make art and people who consume art both have the individual responsibility to try to understand people other than themselves and outside themselves, and sort of decide based on their own value systems what they consider acceptable and what they don't, without racism factoring in. It has to be value based, not geography and race based. That's really important. So if you're, for example, depicting Pakistan's slums, or if you're depicting an honor killing case that's happening in a village in Pakistan, it's important for you as a filmmaker and for a consumer to understand that's not the only narrative and the only story there. That's one of the most important pressing stories there. It's not the only one, because people can't be that way. And if you think everybody in Pakistan is that way, then that's a racist and stereotypical take. So the necessity to understand individuals, regardless of culture and country, regardless of race, is going to be the most helpful, I think, in representation. But it has to be by everyone. It has to be by both the audience members and the creators, because the creators are not always going to be the most competent at telling their stories. There was a show called Aliens in America that I thought was really horrible. It was about a Pakistani person who comes to live with an American family, and it got one season, and the gag in every episode was that this guy's from Pakistan, a savage illiterate. Look at him trying to make it in high school. Basically a Borat, but not on purpose.
Okay.
And it's true that characters like that will exist. You will be able to find a kid in a village in Pakistan who comes here and doesn't match with the culture, doesn't vibe with the culture here. And you'll also find people like me. But that TV show only showed that one reality. The Pakistani identity was a punchline.
Yeah.
That's lazy for both the creators and also lazy for consumers.
Yeah, I know my son used to watch a show, and he was young, and it just happened to be on. I want to say it was like a Disney show, but there was one, like, I'll say Indian, even though I don't know, but that sort of thing with the fakest goddamn accent. And one day my mother-in-law was there, and she's like, I think isn't it wonderful that they're employing people from India? I'm like, there is no goddamn way that's an American doing an Indian accent. I mean, I've been around you, I've listened to you enough that I could imitate your accent, but that's all I'm doing is imitating your accent. And anybody with 2 ears will say, that's not a native thing. That's someone imitating it, which, I mean, and maybe that's kind of what you're talking about, where I can see how that would be insulting because it's a caricature.
Well, yeah, I feel like that goes into another gray area, which is what the second generation is here in America. So a lot of second gen, like Indians who are born here, or Pakistanis who are born here, or Japanese people who are born here, are going to be a little bit different from people
Yeah.
who live and are born in Pakistan or India or Japan because of the value systems and beliefs and the accent, for example. So a lot of Indians on Indian TV are Indian Americans, and that's why their accents are pretty different. I do
Yeah.
wish we could do a bit more work on it. I think Hassan Minhaj from the Patriot Act talks about this at one point, that everybody makes fun of his accent, but he's not from India, so he can't do a different accent.
Right.
And I also think that there has to be a way to make a distinction between, well, second gen immigrants are Americans, basically, and people who are from Pakistan are Pakistani. And that distinction can be made in terms of culture, understanding, and empathy, as long as it is devoid of racism. Because
Yeah.
our differences should be celebrated.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And a friend of mine, he's from Tunisia, and when I met him and we'd hang out, and he's like, "Don't believe that shit that you see on CNN about Tunisia. That's not the country." And I really got a sense of it over the summer when we had the protests down here. And I remember one day I drove down or walked down to the protest just kind of see what was going on, and rubber bullets and tear gas and all that stuff. And then I walked back to my office and got in my car, and 45 seconds drive down East Ave, that was a different world, what I was leaving behind, in 4 square blocks of downtown Rochester. But my brother in Baltimore, when he sees Rochester on the evening news, that's almost like the impression he gets, just like that was the impression that I had of Tunisia, because CNN shows, some sort of skirmish that's happening in a quarter of a mile. I'm rambling, but can
No,
you?
that's exactly right, actually, because my mom also calls me up when the US in the news. She's like, "Oh my God, there's riots everywhere. Are you okay? Is your house on fire?" And I'm like, "No, mom," because she can't compartmentalize riots are happening in concentrated spots, not across the whole continent, not in a specific state, or within that state, a specific community, or within that community, a specific street. It doesn't go that narrow for her. It's just the holistic thing that she's seeing. And it's the same for Americans seeing news from other places. You kind of have to have a sense of scale and statistics and math to understand how big or small something is. Not to sort of suggest that tragedy is smaller than it is, because you should mourn tragedy all the time, no matter how small.
Right. On a human scale, tragedy is tragedy. And
Yeah, on an individual scale. But
Mhm.
still, you can't sort of extrapolate that to a very large geographical area. It doesn't make sense to do that.
Right. You had said your city in Pakistan is 70 million people.
Yeah, I think Karachi is the third most populated, or the third biggest city in the whole world. Let me just look that up real quick.
Karachi, I've heard
Yeah.
of that. I think it was, I think Karachi was in The Naked Gun. I think that's where OJ got hurt and pushed over the boat.
I am not sure about that. But yeah, Karachi is the third biggest city in the world in terms of population.
So 70 million people means
18
that, how many?
18 million.
18 million. Okay,
Yeah.
so if 18,000 people are in a race war, for lack of a better term, it's a real fucking fight. That's 1% of the city's population, where and on the other side of it, it is still 18,000 individuals, who are doing, whatever it is. But in the grand scheme of things, it is 1% of the population of the city.
Yeah, that's what I mean by empathy without racism, for example. You need to be able to protest a tragedy of that scale and understand that 18,000 people is a lot, and understand that shouldn't be happening and that's bad, and what are the structural things you can change to stop that. But you also have to know that it's not an entire country's identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's something that I say we, and I don't mean we as Americans, I think I mean we as human beings have always struggled with. And I think we're probably going to continue to struggle with. And, I'd like to think that we can solve it, Komal, me, you, and these computers, but I don't know if it's going to happen today. What's that?
How about tomorrow, 1 p.m. tomorrow, 24 hours to solve it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. We have to have more realistic expectations. So 24 hours, yes. But I hope I'm not getting too personal, but do you have plans to go back to Pakistan? Would it be to visit? Would it be to live? And how much of that choice is in your control?
I definitely want to go back because there's a lot of work there that I'm interested in doing. Not purely in film, a lot of it in education, if I can. But I don't know when. Probably within the next 3 to 5 years. I don't know what the situation is like with COVID, but I definitely want to go back at some point and work there a couple more years. I don't know if I want to live permanently in Pakistan because I have had a lot of traumatic experiences, and there is still a lot of work in terms of feminism that I don't want to deal with there. But
right.
Yeah,
You would need literally
life.
You would need literally 2 full days to probably solve those gender issues in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to, once you get there, you're going to want to eat all the food. You're going to want to try on all the sheets. You're not going to have time to devote 2 days to solve those issues. So
Yeah.
I get that.
So I don't know where I'm gonna live, honestly. I haven't really decided, but I would like to go back and forth my whole life. I don't want to let go of my Pakistani identity, and I don't want to let go of the people there who need help. In terms of what's in my control, the US definitely does not want me here. The visa process is very hard. And I've been applying to jobs here. I've got like a lot of work experience, like around 4 years at pretty senior levels. And I never hear back because you need a visa sponsorship, which your company should be helping with. That sort of deters them, especially in COVID times, because immigration processing time has increased a lot, and companies often need fairly fast hires. So not sure what this scenario will be for me to stay here. I am still trying. I'm just a month into the application process, so we'll see. And obviously, immigration is pretty difficult too, because it's, I think, a very complicated process. You have to prove that you have like special talents, that you're not taking jobs away from Americans. You have to sort of
right, but that is one of the funniest parts to me about the anti-immigration argument. They're taking our jobs, where what you're telling me is you have to prove to the government or the immigration You have to prove that you're capable of taking a job that I want, not the other way around. Like if you were to say, look, I can't do a job that any American wants, but I can do any job and I really want to work, they're going to be like, yeah, go back to Pakistan, which is counterintuitive, to the anti-immigration argument.
Yeah, I'm not sure why there's an anti-immigration argument. I don't know the politics of it, but I don't understand it fundamentally. And I feel like I am a pretty hard worker and I should be able to get a job. But yeah,
I agree.
If nothing, I'll go to Canada. They want me over there. So.
Okay. Why? I mean, and why wouldn't they, of course? But what's the difference? Canada is just more open.
It has been trying to diversify its population, which is why it has introduced express entry for skilled labor. So it's a year-long process in which they're trying to bring in skilled immigrants. So I applied for that. Yeah, there's a pretty vibrant film industry in Vancouver and Toronto as well. So I'll probably go there if America doesn't pan out. And then obviously I'll probably go back to Pakistan in maybe the next 5 years, work there a few years, and then move around a bit.
Cool. Well, Komal, thank you so much. I definitely was looking forward to this, even though, there's so much stuff. And I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm just like, holy, like, because when you know someone, I feel like you think that part of what like, holy shit, there's so much, and then you're like, no, that's not a shadow of the whole thing, which is fascinating. I mean, I'm very interested. I'm interested in the human experience and the fact, you had said everybody sees the world through their own little eye hole, in their faces and thinks that that's the world. But, there's so much more out there. And I did get to use your idiom. And I was wondering, how do you say that in Urdu?
Oh, you say, "Saw guna karke billi haj pe chali." I'm not even sure why. So that translates to after 100 sins, a cat goes on pilgrimage. So I'm just like, why is it a cat? Why isn't it a person?
Right. Because I think because American slang, you'd be like, oh, that cat. And I'm sure it's not the same thing. Like, I'm sure that's not the reason.
Slang is very different across languages.
Yeah.
I feel they're a lot more complex in Urdu.
The swears are?
Yeah. In English, you just have fuck. That's it. That's the worst you can say. And everybody says it all the time.
Right. It's versatile.
In India and Pakistan, the swearing is very colorful and rich, almost literary.
Yeah. Like probably a lot more personalized and cutting. Like.
It can be, yes.
Because, yeah, I mean, what's the worst thing I can say to you? Komal, you're a fucking bitch. Go fuck yourself. Great.
And
that's original.
So overused. So, it takes the power from them away a little bit.
I agree. I agree. I was talking to someone the other day about Shakespeare and how Shakespearean insults are so much more specific. And I guess that's the thing. Like if I just say, fuck you, Komal, you're a bitch. It's like, well, how many other people have I said that exact same thing to? But if I were to spend some time and really come up with a personalized insult, you might be like, well, you wouldn't be like, well, fuck you, Jamie. You'd say something in Urdu that would probably be much more insulting. But no, you can work on it.
Do the homework, make the effort to offend people. No, don't do that.
Perfect. Well, Komal, thank you so much. I know you've got a million things going on. How much of the editing process do you handle in the film?
I'm doing a rough cut myself for the full film, and then I'm gonna have an editor look at it for a better cut.
Sure. And is that, and we will wrap up momentarily, but is that because you don't want to all the way kill your baby? And there might be some parts of that baby that you just can't kill, and someone else might have to be like, Komal, this isn't a baby anymore. It's a fucking finger.
Not exactly. It's mostly because I kind of want to have an idea of what the film is going to look like at the end, and what tone it's going to have, and what weight I want to give to what scenes, so that I can communicate that better with an editor. And I also think it's important to do it yourself once, for the practice, for the understanding of the software, and for more sophisticated film language for yourself.
Yeah, and I can see how it would be beneficial, if not essential, for both of those to happen, for the director and creator to do that rough cut, and then to hand it off to someone, to take it from there. I can see how both of them are absolutely essential. Frankly, I can't imagine directing, creating a film, like if there's only one person or even one small circle of people that have been involved from the beginning. I can see how things may slip through, that someone, just separate from it would make different choices. Not that either of them are right or wrong, but I can see how they would turn out different. What is the time frame for the finished product?
Well, I'm probably gonna do an edit by the 26th, because I also want to screen an in-progress cut for feedback at RIT. So probably by the 26th. I'm halfway done with 3 scenes, and I'm done with 1 scene. So
cool.
Yeah.
When you get something that you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to have you back on. We can talk about, I think it'd be fascinating for a lot of people to see, like, when I say rough, I mean the actual camera of, and then to, what you're calling the rough cut here, and then to the finished product. I think people would be fascinated to see all of the work that goes into, that finished product. I know the day that I was on set, we were there for 12 hours to film 10 minutes worth of finished product.
Yep.
Maybe. So yeah, I think that would be fascinating for a lot of people, and definitely looking forward to seeing it. So thank you so much, Komal. Enjoy Boston. And you'll be back soon, you think?
Yeah, probably by next semester.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Komal. I appreciate it, and keep in touch, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks for having me. And
absolutely.
Thanks for a really interesting conversation.
Yes. Thank you. As always. We'll talk to you soon, Komal.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. That was Komal. I didn't ask how to say her last name again. I was calling her Komal forever because I thought, I was being ethnic, maybe. I don't know. But it's not Komal. It's Komal. So yeah, that was really cool. I was looking forward to speaking to her further about some things. And definitely looking forward to seeing the finished product, or even the first step of the finished product of the film. And thank you all for tuning in, and or for watching it after the fact. Stay tuned. We got a couple shows coming up this week, and we will have more going forward. Thanks again to Komal, and thank you guys. Have a great day.